So now we're moving on to the next topic, which is runtime environments. We are in the unit number 4. The discussion that we had all these days in the semester are all about the analysis part. As we have discussed a number of times, I'd like to repeat once again. The discussion we had all these days is all about the analysis part. So we started with our lexical analysis, where the lexemes that are available in the program are identified as tokens. Once the tokens are identified, then we moved on to the syntax analysis. In the syntax analysis phase, we were trying to see how the statements in a program work, and we are trying to check whether the statements of a given program follows the rules that are specified by the grammar of the language or not. And we had different syntax analysis techniques. We had top down, we had bottom up. So we had a detailed discussion about all these techniques. Then we moved on to semantic analysis, where we are trying to understand the meanings that are being conveyed by the programming language, the analysis of the meanings that are conveyed by the programming language. We had SDD, we had the different translation schemes that are used to understand the semantics of a programming language. We then moved on to the intermediate code. So we think now that we have started with the high-level language program, and now we are in a stage where we have developed the intermediate code. Now, as far as the high-level language program is concerned, it is done with its job. It's ready to run, because there are all the issues that are there with its lexical analysis, all the issues that are there with its syntax, all the issues that are there with its semantics. All these things are assumed to be resolved, and we have an intermediate form of the program, and that's it as far as the high-level language is concerned, and it expects things to go smooth, and the program is going to run. But as we all know, the high-level language program runs as a process. Any program, when you want to run it, it's going to be running as a process. The process is what is very, very important. Now, when a program runs as a process, now we're going to talk about what are the most important things when the program runs as a process. The program is going to run in the main memory, and when it runs in the main memory, it needs some space. It needs other associated activities which are very important for it to run. So a runtime environment is what is created. So now how the program is going to handle the runtime environment is what is very important aspect here. So now we're going to discuss about the different issues that are going to exist in the runtime environment and how the issues are to be handled. Now question number 1 is, why does the compiler handle this? Why should the compiler handle the runtime environment? Because it is the compiler which introduces the program which is written in high-level language to the machine. Because as we have discussed n number of times, the machine doesn't understand any of the high-level language programs or its syntax. It understands only the machine understandable form. So it is the compiler which is going to convert this high-level language program to machine understandable form. So it is the one which introduces this program to the machine. So therefore, it's the responsibility of the compiler to see that it creates an environment where the program can run smoothly. So that is the reason why we discuss about the things that are handled by the compiler in the runtime environment. So to start with, a compiler must actually introduce the different abstractions that a source program is going to create. When I say abstractions, by now you all understand what abstractions mean. The target machine or the target code is very limited in its capabilities. It doesn't understand what is a variable name. It doesn't understand what do you mean by the scope of a variable. It doesn't understand what is binding. It doesn't understand what is binding. It doesn't understand all these different aspects that are available with the high level language. It doesn't know what is a data type. It doesn't know what are the different operators that are used in the programming language. What are the procedures that are what is a procedure, doesn't know. What are parameters. So these are all the different things the runtime environment or the target language doesn't understand. So the compiler is going to see to it that these abstractions that are created by the programming languages, they are implemented properly by the target machine. That is where the most important responsibility of the compiler is going to exist. So therefore, the compiler creates and manages a very important area called as the runtime environment, which includes the main memory and all the required associated activities along with the main memory. And it is going to do this so that all these abstractions can be handled properly so that the target program can get executed. And we all know that we are not already running, the program is not already running. So therefore, the compiler assumes that the target programs are being executed, and it creates a runtime environment for that. So now, what are the different issues that are going to be handled by this runtime environment is what is the most important thing. Because the runtime environment needs a lot of issues, most important thing, it needs space. So therefore, the runtime environment is going to take care of the layout and allocation of storage locations for the objects, whatever objects are named that are there in the source program. Okay, so it is going to take care about how these different objects or the different variables that are specified in the source program are being used by the target program. Okay, and in case there are procedures, how the procedures are going to be linked with each other, which is going to call which and which is going to return to which. These are all the aspects are going to be taken care by the compiler. And how the parameters are passing. When the parameters are passed, how are these parameters going to be handled? Okay, what are the different locations where do we have any temporary locations where the parameters can be kept? Okay, these are all the issues. And coming to the other issues, the operating system interfaces, because all the resources that the compiler wants to use or the program wants to use are in fact handled with the operating system. So therefore, the different interfaces that are required, to communicate with the operating system or to request the resources of you want to take input. So the compiler should see to it that the operating system provides a facility. There is an interface which communicates with the operating system to provide the facility of taking the input. Okay, and then finally the input output devices and all the other programs. So these are all the different things the runtime environment that is created by the compiler is assumed to be handled. So these are all and the compiler assumes that the target program is going to be executing, and these are the things it is going to handle. Coming to our discussion, we are not going to talk about all of them. We are not definitely going to talk about all of them. We are going to discuss about two very important things among them. One is the allocation of storage location, and number two, access to variables and data. If you see here, the first two things, the layout and allocation of storage locations, and then mechanisms used by the target programs to access variables. These two things are going to be the discussions that we are going to have here. And most importantly, it's more about storage allocation. How we allocate storage. And when I say it is more about storage allocation, I say it is it's all about memory management, how we manage memory. So the detailed discussion about the memory management is what is actually the discussion that we are going to have throughout this chapter of the unit. And there are three important things that we'll be discussing: stack allocation, heap management, and garbage collection. These are the three things that we're going to go in detail. So these are the things that we are going to talk about throughout this chapter. So we start with the storage organization. The compiler assumes that the executing target program run on in its own logical address space. We all know by now what is logical address space and physical address space. Logical address space is a space where we assume only the program which is currently in consideration is going to exist. So therefore, always the logical addresses are not concerned about the actual physical locations. So every time when you want to have a logical address space, you start at 0 and you can think that this is the only program that is running and you can go on giving addresses. That is not the case about physical address. When the actual program runs, these logical addresses, they need to be mapped to the physical address where the space is available and all these things. Okay, so the management of logical address space is actually performed by all the three participants: the compiler, the operating system, and the target machine. So all of these together, they are going to talk about the logical address space, and they are going to talk about how the mapping is going to be done. Most of the mapping of the logical to physical address is done by the operating system, because the main memory is mostly under the control of the operating system. So therefore, it is the operating system which knows where the actual physical space is available, and so that this logical program can be placed there, and it is the one which is going to take care about it. Now we have an example of a runtime memory that is available for any given program. So this is the runtime representation of an object program. By now, you all know what I mean by an object program. And this object program in the logical address space, it consists of data and program areas that are shown here. So this entire thing is divided into 4 different spaces that we have. The first is the code space, then comes the static space, then comes the heap, and then the stack. So what is going to be the constituents of each of them? We are going to look at it now. The generated target code, whatever is the generated target code, is fixed in size. So therefore, it can be allocated fixed space, or the space for this target code can be allocated at compile time, or it can be called as static allocation. And that allocation is done in the code area, which is the first one. And this allocation, as I've told you, is static, fixed, because we all know how much space it's going to occupy, and it doesn't increase. So that is the area where it is going to occupy the space. And now some objects like the global constants that are declared for the program, okay, any information to support the garbage collection, these all can also be fixed at the compile time, or they also can be fixed at statically, and they're all placed in the static area, which is the second part. So the target code is placed in the code area, and the objects that are available for the program, which can be determined statically or at compile time, they are stored in this area, which is static area. These are the 2 areas which are fixed prior, and they can be allocated. Now coming to stack and heap. If you see the stack and heap, they are opposite to each other. And they both are dynamic. And if you see, there is a lot of free space available in between the stack and heap. So each one grows, stack grows in this direction, whereas the heap grows in this direction. So both of them can utilize and the available space, that is free memory, that is available here. And both of them are dynamic in nature. they're dynamic in nature because their sizes keep changing as the program runs. So therefore, the extra space is given, which can be utilized by them, and they can start growing in size in each other's directions. So that is the way in which stack and heap are organized. Now, what is static? What is dynamic storage allocation? I need not explain, but I'll just say a few words about this. So static is something that can be determined at compile time. Prior to running, if we can determine the amount of space, the amount of time that is going to be done, then we call it as static. If it is determined at the runtime, then that is going to be called as dynamic. So static allocation is not is very easy to do because we know how much space is going to be allocated. So that is very easy. But when it comes to dynamic storage allocation, these are the two strategies that are going to be used. One is the stack storage organization, and the other is the heap storage. Now, why don't we use one? Why do we use two? I need not talk about stack and heap here. You all know they are two different data structures. The way they are organized is completely different to each other. But one thing that is common in between these two is that both of them are dynamic storage allocation strategies. When it comes to the stack storage, we have procedures that are being called. Any names that are local to the procedures, they are going to be allocated space on the stack. So why stack? We will discuss about it. Because of doing this, space can be the utilization of space can be optimized. So local procedures can have space on the stack, because once the procedure call is done, it is returned back, then the space can be utilized by some other procedures. When it comes to heap storage, we have data that live beyond the procedure call, that are going to be they are going to be alive for a longer time. In such cases, the heap storage is the one which is going to be very useful, and in such cases, heap storage is going to be used. We'll start with stack allocation first, and then we will move on to heap allocation, and finally we will be discussing about the garbage collection. So coming to stack allocation of space, so all the modern day compilers that use procedures, functions, which have modular activity of performing an activity or performing a program, they all use stack. They all use stack as runtime memory. Okay, so if stack is used, what are the advantages that we're going to have is, for each procedure space, for its local variables, okay, the local variables can be pushed onto a stack. So because of that, this allows space to be shared. The relative address of the non-local variables cannot be shared. The non-local variables, the relative address can always be same. We need not keep changing the address of the non-local variables, whereas the local variables which share the space go onto the stack and go from there. Then stack allocation is a very useful feature, but if it is not going to be feasible to do stack allocation if the procedures that we run do not nest in time. Now, what do I mean by procedures do not nest in time? It doesn't happen that 2 or 3 procedures will be running at the same time. A procedure calls another procedure, a procedure A calls procedure B, and once procedure B is finished, it returns back to A, then A starts running. And sometimes procedure A can call procedure B, and procedure B can call procedure C. And once the procedure C is over, then it returns back to procedure B, and once procedure B is over, it returns back to procedure A. So this type of phenomenon which is used is what is called as nesting in time. If such thing doesn't happen, then stack allocation is not going to be feasible. If all of them are running at the same time, then there is no use of this mechanism of stack allocation. Generally, when a procedure P calls Q, what are the things that are going to happen? So when a procedure is called, we say that a procedure is being activated, and we call that an activation of procedure P. Now let us assume the activation of procedure P calls procedure Q. Then that activation of Q must end before the activation end. That doesn't happen, then we don't say that the procedures are nested in time. So when that is required, there are three common cases that can happen. So some can be handled, some cannot be handled. The first thing is the activation of Q. The activation of Q terminates normally. If the activation of Q terminates normally, it returns back to P, and the P's activation is going to follow, and that is also going to terminate normally. Case number 2 is the activation of Q aborts abruptly. In such cases, if activation P cannot handle that, because P is the one which calls and P is the one which expects something to be returned from Q. In such cases, P cannot handle, then P also ends simultaneously with Q. And case number 3 is the case where the activation of Q terminates because of an exception, and because P has the capability to handle the exception, because of P has the capability to handle the exception, though Q terminates, P can still continue. These are the three different cases of how the activations of procedures happen while the allocation happens on a stack. Now let us look at an example. The example that we have in the following slide contains a program that reads 9 integers into an array and sorts them using the recursive quicksort algorithm. So we'll just look at the algorithm and then we'll come back. So this is the quicksort algorithm. I think most of you have some knowledge about this quicksort algorithm. So here what happens is this is the main program that we have here. I'll explain this algorithm and we'll stop. We have this main program here. This main program is going to first call the program called as read array. Okay, and what is this read array? This read array is here. This is what is the read array procedure. So what this read array procedure is going to do is it is going to read 9 integers into a of 1, 9, and then it is going to return. And what we do is after it is returned, we keep a of 0 as -9999 and a of 10 as 9999. Why? Because we want a of 0 to be the smallest possible value and we want a of 10 to be the biggest possible value, because what we are trying to do is we are trying to sort the given array. Therefore a of 0 and a of 10 are assumed to be smallest and the biggest ones. Then now the main program calls the quicksort program. The quicksort is going to be called now, and it is going to pass the parameters 1, 9. So once it is called, we go to the quicksort program here. Okay, so this quicksort program has 2 parameters which have come as 1, which are the 2 arguments 1 and 9. Now as long as n is greater than m, we continue the program. You all must have known about quicksort. Quicksort is a program which is going to partition. Which is going to divide and conquer is what is the procedure that is followed by quicksort. Suppose now This is the array that we have. Such a beautiful writing, no? This is the array that we have, and each time what we are going to do is this is going to be partition. This is going to be partitioned, and whatever is partitioned, that is the one which is going to be sorted. Once completely sorted, everything is going to be kept in place. The most important idea behind this is at each point of time we are going to identify a pivot element. Okay, we call it pivot or pivot. That element is going to be identified, and anything to the left of that element is going to be which is going to be the what do you call the smaller number. Anything that is to the right of it is going to be the number which is higher in number. So that is the way it is going to be done. So then once the quicksort is being called, we call the partition program, and this partition program, what it is going to do is it is going to pick the pivot element, separator value v, and then partitions this into two parts. Okay, one is a of m to n, and the other is a of into two parts. A of m to p minus 1 is 1, and a of p plus 1 to n, So these two parts are done, and then it is going to again recursively call quicksort, and then it is going to be partition. So this is the way the program is going to run. So when this program runs, we are going to have different activities that are going to happen in this. Activities that are going to happen while this program runs, we shall handle in the next class. So for now, we'll stop the class here, and I'd like to hear from you after this about what you have understood from this class. So now I stop the recording.